When I start this research project, we did a systematic review to evaluate the environmental impact of pig production. And we found that more than 60% on average of the environmental impact is associated with feeds. So when we are working to mitigate those environmental impacts, we need to focus on feed formulation, and what strategy we can use to mitigate those impacts.
Welcome to the Swine Nutrition Blackbelt Podcast, the latest swine nutrition research digested for you. I'm your host, Clayton Chastain, and today we have with us Dr. Felipe Hickmann, a recent PhD graduate from the University of Laval. So, Felipe, you've been on the show before. It's been a little bit since you were, but would you mind giving the audience a brief introduction about yourself as a reminder?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. I'm born and raised in a pig farm in southern Brazil, so I'm always in contact with pigs somehow. But I also did some research on nutritional strategies to mitigate the environmental impacts of pig production. So I have some research experience in Australia, United States, Canada, Switzerland, and I'm working with more nutritional strategies and their impact on manure management. So in the past, I already did some podcasts that we were analyzing other enzymes, beta-manganase, for example. But in today's episode, I will focus more on phytase and their impact on the environment.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that actually was a perfect transition there, because that's what I was going to ask you about, because I've seen some of that research that you've recently published on phytase supplementation and specifically its effect on the environment. So I guess just to start us off, what research have you been doing regarding that, and what results have you seen?
When I start this research project, we did a systematic review to evaluate the environmental impact of pig production. And we found that more than 60% on average of the environmental impact is associated with feeds. So when we are working to mitigate those environmental impacts, we need to focus on feed formulation, and what strategy we can use to mitigate those impacts. So I have been working on several strategies we can utilize to mitigate those impacts. We have worked with enzymes, lowering crude protein, and adjusting manure nutrient levels. And when we are working with enzymes, we are looking how those enzymes, they interact with the feeds and how they affect nutrient availability and how it impacts excretion. So besides other enzymes, phytase is a very known enzyme, very established enzyme that's used in most of the scenarios. And when we are doing another systematic review, we found that only 4 studies, they work with phytase through life cycle assessment. So when you are working with environmental impacts, you can evaluate environmental impacts on different ways. We can just focus on the excretion, what was the excretion related with such nutrition strategy, but we can also perform a complete life cycle assessment to evaluate the entire environmental impact for each life cycle phase. So when we performed those reviews, we found that only 4 studies have worked with phytase. So if you think, well, phytase is a very established enzyme, but only 4 studies have worked with phytase using life cycle assessment. So there are a lot of things we can extract from this review, and several other things that we need to focus for future research. There are different ways that we can analyze phytase. For example, doing those, we can just simulate the environmental impacts for like hypothesis scenarios, but also work with real data. So we do an experiment, we collect the performance, and we use those data to incorporate in our assessment. So there are different ways we can evaluate the environmental impacts associated with phytase. But one thing that is very important is to know what's the impact on the performance of the animals. The first thing that I would ask you is, the phytase has an impact on the performance of the animals. So most people will say, yes, of course, but it really depends. It depends on the amount of phosphorus that is being given in the diets. Because in our review, we found that if you are giving too little phosphorus, so in those NPP levels that are very low, you have a high impact of phytase. So there is a lot of impact on the performance of the animals because you are improving the phosphorus availability. So you are improving the phosphorus that's being absorbed for the animals. But when you start giving more phosphorus in the diets, you are providing more inorganic phosphorus, the impact of phytase starts to reduce because you are providing the phosphorus that's needed. So you don't need the phytase at all. So the impact of phytase depends on the amount of phosphorus that's being given. So when you think, okay, so it depends on the amount of phosphorus that's being given. So what's really the environmental impact associated with phytase? Is the ability of replacing inorganic phosphorus that otherwise would be given to the feeds. So when you are replacing the inorganic phosphorus that should be given in the feeds, we are reducing the environmental impacts because we are reducing the amount of phosphorus that's needed. That's a non-renewable resource. But also we are reducing the amount of phosphorus that's being excreted. So when you start working with phytase, we saw in our review that up to 50% of the phosphorus that's being given to the animals, we can be reduced through phytase supplementation. So there's a lot of phytase a lot of phosphorus that we can reduce in the manure. And it also affects how we are handling manure, because if you are reducing the amount of phosphorus that's present in the manure, we are changing how the manure is handled. Because in places like Quebec, Canada, they apply based on the phosphorus content. So if you have lower amounts of phosphorus, you need more amounts of inorganic nitrogen, for example, as urea, to replace those lower levels of phosphorus. So when we are working with pigs and poultry, it's a little bit not balanced the amount of phosphorus and nitrogen in the manure, given the amount of phytase that's giving if you compare to other species as well. So there are a lot of impacts that we need to handle when we are working with phytase in the feeds, but also when we are working with the manure. So there are a lot of things that we need to consider when we are working with phytase in life cycle assessments. But in the review that we performed, we saw that only 4 studies work with phytase, and there are a lot of variability in the studies because each studies perform the life cycle assessment in a different way. So it's very hard to compare one study, for example, that was developed in the United States. They compare different regions and the impact of different feed ingredients with another study was performed in Brazil that was with a complete different feed. So it's, and also the functional unit. You cannot compare apples with bananas. You need to standardize those methodologies to be able to compare. So when you are performing life cycle assessment studies, it's very hard to compare sometimes because they are using different functional units. So from those 4 studies that we found in the review, we cannot compare, but we can see some trends in the environmental benefits. For example, reduction of phosphorus excretion, replacement of inorganic phosphorus, and other benefits associated with phytase supplementation. So the question that you may be asking is, how can precision feeding or another phytase technology also help in phytase supplementation in terms of environmental impact? When we are matching those nutrient requirements for those exact amount that the animals need. We are reducing the amount that's needed in the feed, but also that's being given that's also present in the manure. So there is a lot of benefits of using precision feeding with phytase. And with those new technology, we can also enhance the phytase activity. That's another important factor when working with phytase. Those life cycle assessments, they are evaluated as, for example, a given output, a given amount of resources that needed for a given output. So more than 90% usually of the environmental impact associated with pig production is associated with pig performance. So if you are optimizing resources like phosphorus and you are improving the performance of the animals, we are improving also the environmental impacts associated with pig production.
Fortiva is moving beyond feed additives to create foundational ingredients that work with your pig's physiology to support resilience and health. With proven technologies like Ambatine, Flow Matrix, and Endura, Fortiva helps you address the toughest challenges in swine production. From gut health to growth performance, together we can make animals more resilient in the face of future challenges. Learn how at fortivaimpact.com.
Gotcha. So yeah, you talked about reducing the amount of phosphorus in the manure excretion. And if I recall correctly, it's been a few years since I've been in grad school, but thinking back on it, I remember talking about phytase supplementation and like the amount of phytate that is in the diet. No matter how much phytase you put in, the maximum phosphorus that you can recover from that phytate is about 70%. I think it was 70%. Like I said, it's been a little bit since I've been in grad school, but what's kind of the reason behind that? Why only 70? Why aren't we able to like get 100% phytate breakdown and release all that phosphorus to become available to the animal?
Well, it's related with the biology. So the animals, they already can use the phytic acid, 1/3 of the phytic acid, but the other 2/3 they are not able to use that is provided in the feeds. So there is a limit that we can maximize the use of phytase. But the thing is, in terms of environmental impacts, it's not the amount, okay, let's use phytase and use a lot of phytase. No, because there is also an impact associated with phytase production. So one of the studies that was in the review, they found a little bit increase in land use that is needed to produce the phytase. So you need to always reach an equilibrium. That's the amount of phytase that you are providing to maximize performance, but also maximize environmental impact. So there is a limit in terms of the biology of the animals, and there is a limit in terms of the environmental impact that we can reach.
Gotcha. Well, I believe that's all the time we have. So thank you again, Felipe, for coming on the show and sharing the results of your work with us.
Thank you very much.
Yep, and everyone else, thank you for listening to the Swine Nutrition Blackbelt Podcast. Please visit us at swinenutritionblackbelt.com, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channel so you won't miss out on the next episode. See you next week.